It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
And good afternoon, and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And the whistleblower complaint and the president's reaction, the reaction from the presidential campaign of Joe Biden, is gripping Washington, D.C. This saga continues, so we'll talk about it today on the show. If you'd like to comment, you can call in at 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. Welcome to my listeners here on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio, and thanks for tuning in. Well, we've been following this whistleblower saga for the past couple of weeks, and I've written some columns on it. You can check those out at PennLive.com and see what I'm saying. We've covered a lot of the whistleblower complaint in prior shows, and so we'll kind of go through a rundown of the latest updates in the whistleblower complaint, the impeachment effort, and the responses from Democratic presidential candidates, namely Joe Biden. Well, here's what we've learned since last week's show. The whistleblower is a career CIA analyst who had worked with the National Security Council with former Vice President Joe Biden. And apparently this analyst has expertise in Ukraine. And now recall that Michael Atkinson, the Intelligence Community's Inspector General, he is the official who reviewed the whistleblower complaint, determined it was an urgent concern, and the whistleblower was credible. He told members of Congress, remember, that the whistleblower had a professional tie to a 2020 Democratic candidate. He had written earlier that the whistleblower's complaint was credible and had shown some indicia of an arguable political bias in favor of a rival political candidate. This was the written statement of Michael Atkinson, the Intelligence Community's Inspector General, also telling us about this professional tie with a 2020 Democratic candidate. We now know that 2020 Democratic candidate is former Vice President Joe Biden, who is the target of so much of this story about alleged corruption in Ukraine with Joe Biden and his son Hunter, and efforts by President Trump and his personal attorney Rudy Giuliani to investigate and uncover more of what this corruption was all about. There are allegations, and the president, through his personal attorney, have been taking a look into these credible allegations. So Joe Biden really is at the center of the story. He's at the center of some of the efforts by the president to investigate his dealings in Ukraine when he was the vice president of the United States and the point person put there by then President Obama to lead the U.S. efforts in Ukraine. And now apparently he has some ties to this whistleblower who is a CIA analyst and member of the National working within the NSC, and apparently, and obviously, the whistleblower being kind of the central instigator now of this impeachment inquiry that has begun in the United States House. Well, actually, really, you can't say it's begun in the United States House of Representatives because there has been no vote by the United States House of Representatives. It's just begun by utterance into existence by the Speaker of the House and some committees that have been looking into it and conducting these quasi investigations. So the whistleblower's attorneys themselves characterized the whistleblower's background as one who has served in an apolitical civil servant positions in the executive branch. And recall House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff. Now, this is interesting. This is a development of a day or two ago. Recruited two former National Security Council aides who worked alongside the CIA whistleblower at the NSC during the Obama and Trump administrations. And the individuals are named Abigail Grace, who worked at the NSC until 2018, was hired in February, while Sean Misko, an NSC aide, until 2017, joined Adam Schiff's committee staff in August. That was the same month the whistleblower submitted his complaint. Now remember, the House Intelligence Committee has been anointed by Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi as the lead committee conducting this impeachment inquiry into the president. And also recall that its chairman, Adam Schiff, a Democrat from California, who for a long time has been calling for the impeachment of the president and leading efforts to try to remove Trump from office, from his Russia collusion hoax, and now to this whistleblower campaign. Adam Schiff has been at the forefront of these efforts. And also recall that Adam Schiff, when he was interviewed on one of the Talking Head shows, denied that we, using the plural we, had any communication or contact with the whistleblower prior to the filing of the complaint. That turns out to be a false statement, in that the whistleblower did approach and have communications with Adam Schiff's staff at the House Intelligence Committee, where the whistleblower was reportedly advised on how to initiate a whistleblower complaint, and to hire counsel, and which counsel to hire. So, boy, there's a lot of connections here among Joe Biden and Adam Schiff and the whistleblower and the NSC in these efforts now to kind of trump up new charges against President Trump to give some grounds that the House can use to try to remove the president from office. And, this, my friends, is the latest deep state Democratic attempt at a putsch or a coup. The whistleblower, we know, is a Democrat who had a professional tie with former Vice President Joe Biden and took guidance from the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff's staff. The House Intelligence Committee is leading the impeachment effort. As we've reported here on the Mark Scaringi Show, Schiff lied about that, and his staff recommended the attorneys for the so-called whistleblower. The whistleblower's lawyers themselves, remember on last week's show, and it's also in my column on Penn Live, we talked about how they formed a nonprofit, and they have been soliciting charitable tax-deductible donations through their nonprofit that are designed to essentially provide payments to the law firm for legal services rendered to whistleblowers. And they have also advertised they're giving discounts and legal fees to individuals who will bring complaints against the Trump administration. And they've plastered the metro in Washington, D.C. with advertisements trying to essentially troll for potential whistleblowers to bring complaints against the Trump administration. And so here we are. We've got one. We'll talk more about the whistleblower complaint and the impeachment process when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to the Mark Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking about an affront to the U.S. Constitution that has been instigated by the Democratic Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and the Democratic chairman of the various House committees that have essentially converted oversight investigations into an impeachment investigation. And I've talked a lot, and I've written a lot about how that's not quite the way it's supposed to work. That the Constitution gives the power to the House of Representatives to initiate impeachment proceedings, not just the Speaker of the House. And the House acts by by bills, by resolutions, by votes and majority votes to put things into motion, not just by the utterance of the Speaker of the House. Yet that's where we are today in Washington, D.C. We're also going through a little bit of the background on the whistleblower complaint, how it came about, and the interconnectedness and interrelationships between the primary actors in this latest hoax that has been perpetrated upon this president. And we're talking about how the whistleblower is a Democrat. He has professional ties to former Vice President Joe Biden, who seeks to unseat President Trump in the upcoming general elections if he can make it through the primary campaign. The whistleblower took guidance from the Democratic House Intelligence Committee led by Adam Schiff. He was informed how to proceed under the Whistleblower Act. He was advised to obtain counsel. It just so happens that the counsel he chose has been a law firm that has been trolling for whistleblower complaints against the Trump administration, offering discounts for those who would bring them. And now also we learned that this particular whistleblower worked with individuals in the National Security Council, officials who are now on the House Intelligence Committee staff of Adam Schiff. The whistleblower lawyers themselves, a former director, the whistleblower's lawyers themselves worked for the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper, who has been an outspoken opponent of President Trump and an advocate for the impeachment of Trump. They've also worked for former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who has been an outspoken opponent of the president and advocate for his impeachment, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. The whistleblower's lawyers also donated to Joe Biden's presidential campaign. And as well, one of the whistleblower's attorneys is allegedly a member of the hashtag resistance and is a member of the anti-Trump movement. Wow. So there is just so much interconnectedness there among the intelligence officials in the National Security Council, individuals who have worked with the former Vice President Joe Biden. A great big effort here by individuals who've worked with each other, know each other, and they're making this concerted effort to take a telephone call between two leaders, the President of the United States and the President of Ukraine, and misconstrue and distort and even fabricate, if we're talking about Adam Schiff's parody of the telephone call that Schiff delivered in his opening statements to one of the congressional committee hearings on the impeachment inquiry. They've turned all of this into an effort to essentially create a crime that never existed and then use that fabricated crime in order to impeach the president. Now, House Democrats, they've continued their, really it's almost a secret impeachment inquiry because so much of it has occurred behind closed doors. They are secretly interviewing members of the Trump administration. Why these interviews are not being conducted in public in a committee hearing is a question that Republicans and members of the White House, the administration, have raised and should continue to raise to try to move this secret impeachment inquiry. It's almost like a star chamber to date. Move it out into the open. Move it out into these committees and have actual hearings instead of all of this closed door stuff. Now, this time behind closed doors was former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. Now, she was appointed as envoy to Ukraine in mid-2016 by President Barack Obama. Now, she testified just yesterday for 9 hours behind closed doors. She served as ambassador from August of 2016 through May of 2019. Then she was recalled by President Trump. Now, all we really know about her testimony is, well, what's been leaked to the media, except for her opening statement, which was released to the public. Now, in the opening statement, which I find there are some passages in the opening statement which I think are telling about the bias and the motive behind this U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, and probably gives justification for Trump's recalling of this ambassador. In her opening statement, she essentially is accusing top Trump administration officials of staging a concerted campaign against her based on unfounded and false claims by people with clearly questionable motives. Now, that's a quote from her opening statement. And here's one passage from the opening statement, or two passages. I'll read those, and then I'll give you my commentary on what they mean. The former Ukrainian ambassador wrote this: because of Ukraine's geostrategic position bordering Russia on its east, the warm waters of the oil-rich Black Sea to its south, and 4 NATO allies to its west, she says it is critical to the security of the United States that Ukraine remain free and democratic, and that it continue to resist Russian expansionism and Russia's purported annexation of Crimea, its invasion of eastern Ukraine, and its de facto control over the Sea of Azov. Of course, everybody knows where the Sea of Azov is. Make clear Russia's malign intentions toward Ukraine. If we allow Russia's actions to stand, we will set a precedent that the United States will regret from decades to come. So let's take a brief foray into U.S. foreign policy, and let's question the assumption delivered by the former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, who is critical of the grounds upon which she was essentially terminated by President Trump from her position as ambassador to Ukraine. And she says that the national security interest of the United States is at stake. She says it's critical to the security of the United States that Ukraine remain free and democratic, and that it continue to resist Russian expansionism. So let's pose the question: is it critical to the security of the United States that Ukraine remain free and democratic, and that it continue to resist Russian expansionism? That's the question. And you see where her obvious bias is. You see that this former ambassador to Ukraine believes it's critically important for U.S. foreign policy to treat Russia as an adversary and an enemy, and defend the purported territorial integrity of Ukraine against a Russian army. That's the position of this former U.S. ambassador. Do you believe that's the position of the President of the United States? Is that what President Trump ran on? That he would go to war against Russia to defend the territorial integrity of Crimea? I tend to think not. I think this U.S. ambassador is articulating a foreign policy that is diametrically opposed to the foreign policy of her president, the foreign policy that President Trump ran on when he was running for this office, and opposed to the foreign policy that the president has actually put into place since he has been leading this country as the chief diplomat of the United States and the chief spokesperson for U.S. national security interests. So you have a U.S. ambassador to Ukraine who is not carrying out the express will and intention and foreign policy of her boss. That's the President of the United States. So the Ukrainian, our former Ukrainian ambassador, this Maria Yovanovitch, really, it's not for her to decide what is in the national security interests of the United States. It's her job to carry out the national security and foreign policy decisions made by her boss, the president. The president has the constitutional authority in those particular areas. Yovanovitch, all of the ambassadors are agents of the president. They carry out the will of the president. And here we have, accuse me of being a conspiracy theorist, but here we have a deep stater in the position of ambassador to Ukraine, who is not doing and carrying out what the president wants. So he wants her out of there. And he recalled her as his prerogative. And I can't imagine that any American would think that the U.S. national security interest is endangered by the fact that Russia once again is controlling Crimea, that it has controlled since Catherine the Great in the 1700s. Why is this? How on God's green earth could this endanger the United States? That I would like to know. If you have the answer, you're welcome to call in 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. Now, the Ukrainian ambassador, former I should say, she then explains that she was removed from office by the president based upon baseless conspiracy theories. That seems to be the term of the last couple of years. Whenever a Republican, including the president, takes an action to remove a member of the deep state from a position of power in the administration, that is somehow comes about as a result of a conspiracy theory. Maybe it's the fact that she just wasn't carrying out the foreign policy directives of the president. Well, in any event, this Yovanovitch believes that it's somehow dangerous to American foreign policy that she was fired. She claims she came under attack by foreign interests, and the Trump administration did not have her back. And that will lead to the continued deterioration of the Department of State, which she claims has already suffered so much under the Trump administration. And she further claims that Trump's actions against her and others serve only the interests of Russia. And there we have it again. Remember, how many times do our friends in the Democratic Party continually utter that refrain that whatever the president does, he's doing in the interests of Russia? So he recalls a U.S. ambassador to Ukraine who's not carrying out his foreign policy objectives, and that is characterized by her, by the media, and by Democrats as carrying out the interests of Russia. No, to the contrary, the president's actually carrying out the interests of the American people and the United States of America. More on this when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
News Radio WHP 580, powered by AC repair or replacement. Contact. Let's get back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking today about the whistleblower complaint and testimony behind closed doors from the former ambassador to Ukraine, Maria Yovanovitch. Yovanovitch, in her opening statement, kind of took the Trump administration to task. We don't know exactly what she testified to behind closed doors because our Democratic friends are essentially conducting a star chamber, a secret impeachment of the President of the United States, doing so much work behind closed doors. I guess they don't want the American people to know what these witnesses are actually saying under oath. Nevertheless, we have the opening statement, and we're reading a little bit from the opening statement of the former ambassador to Ukraine who was recalled by President Trump. She also writes, in such circumstances, the only interests that will be served, and she's talking about the Trump action, the president's action to recall her. She's saying the only interests that will be served are those of our strategic adversaries, like Russia, that spread chaos and attack the institutions and norms that the United States helped create and which we have benefited from for the past 75 years. So that's Yovanovitch characterizing Russia as a strategic adversary of the United States, which is further evidence that this Ukrainian ambassador, this woman who held a very powerful position in our U.S. Department of State, in our Foreign Diplomatic Corps, she is wedded to the past. She's wedded to the old thinking that the former Soviet Union was an adversary of the United States, which it unquestionably was. But as President Barack Obama remonstrated Mitt Romney during Obama's reelection campaign. The 80s called, and they want their foreign policy back. And I wish Barack Obama would admonish members of the deep state in the Department of State with that same refrain, because the 1980s are over. The Soviet Union has been destroyed. It imploded from within because of its socialist economic system, which our friends in the Democratic Party want to bring to the United States of America. Russia is not the Soviet Union. Russia is not a strategic adversary of the United States. Nevertheless, so many people, so many men and women who work for you and I in the Department of State, in the diplomatic corps, they still believe to this day that Russia is an enemy. So their foreign policy is at odds with the man who articulates foreign policy, and that's the President of the United States. So there's the rub. There's the rub, and perhaps that's why she's gone. Russia is not our strategic adversary. That's not the position of the Trump administration. Trump has said that maybe 1,000 times, that he wants to be friends with Russia and that Russia should not be our enemy. So again, this U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, in my view, appears to be yet another neoconservative who's not carrying out the U.S. foreign policy as determined by the man who makes it, the president. So in my view, President Trump should have fired every single deep stater and every single neocon on day one of his administration. To his detriment, he hired several of them. He brought many neocons into his administration. John Bolton is just one of many examples. Now Bolton's gone as National Security Advisor. H.R. McMaster was another. There are many examples of this president going out of his way to bring these neoconservatives into his administration. And look what havoc they have wreaked with the power that he has given them. This Maria Yovanovitch should never have been promoted to ambassador to Ukraine, and it's good for the American people that she's gone, because she wants Russia to be our enemy. She wants to continue an adversarial position against a foreign country that has actually worked with us in the Middle East to root out ISIS and the terrorist state and the caliphate there. So it's perplexing why the president seems to do this to himself over and over again. We know from the release of the transcript of the telephone call between President Zelensky of Ukraine and President Trump that Trump did not like Yovanovitch and that he was happy that she was removed. He called her bad news. He said in the transcript, the former ambassador from the U.S., the woman, was bad news, and the people she was dealing with in the Ukraine were bad news. So I just want to let you know, this is what President Trump told the Ukrainian President Zelensky during their telephone call, and Zelensky was also pleased that she was removed and agreed with President Trump that she was bad news and that she should have been removed. So, to me, what is the problem? Why is Yovanovitch even testifying before this congressional committee? We've read her opening statement. Her opening statement reveals no crime, no high crime or misdemeanor, no wrongdoing by the President of the United States. What is the purpose of calling her to testify? Does anybody know? I mean, this is another example where President Trump and President Zelensky have that telephone call, and Democrats and the media and the whistleblowers say Trump pressured Zelensky, and Zelensky's saying, I wasn't pressured at all. There was no push. There was no pressure, as stated by President Zelensky. Now here we have the transcript revealing these two leaders, the leader of the Ukraine, or the leader of Ukraine and the United States, both saying Yovanovitch, it was right for Yovanovitch to be recalled. It was right for her to go. She wasn't helping, supporting the best interests of either president of either country. All right, so she's gone. What's the big deal? Now she is a witness in an impeachment trial against the President of the United States, and the media are waiting with bated breath on every leak that comes out of the hearing and every part of her opening statement. You know, I will make one procedural point about her testimony and recall that beautiful letter. That's the way the president, I'm sure, would have described it, from White House counsel Pat Cipollone to the various House committees. Now, that's that letter where the White House attorney wrote that in order to fulfill his duties to the American people, the Constitution, the executive branch, and all future occupants of the office of the presidency, President Trump and his administration cannot participate in your partisan and unconstitutional inquiry under these circumstances. And I applauded the White House counsel for that well-written and well-cited with legal citations letter opposing these efforts by the House committee to essentially convert oversight hearings into an impeachment inquiry without doing what without doing it the way traditionally it has always been done, which is by a vote by the full House of Representatives to authorize an impeachment inquiry. And in fact, we've talked about this, that the Constitution actually empowers the House of Representatives and not just one member, i.e. the Speaker, to conduct impeachments. But in any event, in light of that letter from the White House, the New York Times wrote that Ms. Yovanovitch, who remains a State Department employee, showed up, and the New York Times was surprised that she showed up at all to testify. The New York Times stated that it was remarkable that she showed up to testify in light of that letter, because that was the letter where the White House counsel kind of lashed out at the impeachment inquiry, saying government officials would not testify and no documents would be provided. Now, the New York Times called the White House and asked, well, what's up with the fact that Yovanovitch is here testifying before a House committee? And the White House did not respond when the New York Times asked the White House for comment just yesterday. So we'll have to wait and see what's going on here. The Times is reporting this as the former Ukrainian ambassador defying the administration's directive against appearing before the impeachment proceedings. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Fox News, and you listen to the news report at the last break. They're reporting that Yovanovitch is essentially thwarting the directive of the White House counsel. So we'll see what's going on here. There is the matter that the White House was concerned that the House committees were simply attempting to get these individuals to testify via a letter without a subpoena and the compulsion that a subpoena brings. But we shall see. Now, meanwhile, Democrats are going on the offensive, or 2020 presidential candidates, namely Joe Biden is. Joe Biden has now called for the impeachment of the president, whereas before he was a little bit wishy-washy. He has now come out in the media reports as a fiery speech calling for the impeachment of the president. It's hard to call anything Joe Biden does as fiery because it takes him so long through stumbles and mumbles and murmurs to get to the point of what he's actually trying to convey. But on Wednesday, Joe Biden accused the president of obstructing justice and violating his oath of office. And here's the quote from former Vice President Joe Biden. He stated, to preserve our Constitution, our democracy, our basic integrity, Trump should be impeached. That's not only because of what he's done. To answer whether he's committed acts sufficient to warrant impeachment is obvious. It's no joke. I love how Biden always says that. It's no joke. He's shooting holes in the Constitution, and we cannot let him get away with it. So there's Joe Biden stating that it is obvious that President Trump has committed acts sufficient to warrant impeachment. So here we have the former vice president, a potential challenger to President Trump in the 2020 general election, stating on the record that Trump should be convicted of impeachment because it is obvious, according to Biden, that Trump has committed acts sufficient to warrant impeachment. And that is a remarkable statement in and of itself, because there has been no impeachment hearing yet. There has been no trial yet. More on the whistleblower and the impeachment when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now back to The Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And now we're getting into the latest developments in the impeachment inquiry. Former Vice President Joe Biden on the campaign trail just a few days ago, finally calling for the impeachment of President Trump. And according to his statement, the former vice president has declared that it's obvious that President Trump has committed acts sufficient to warrant impeachment. So it's over for Joe Biden. He doesn't need to watch the hearings, doesn't need to hear the evidence presented, doesn't need to hear cross-examination, doesn't need to review any records, does not need to listen to the trial in the Senate. He's already decided, let's impeach Trump, get him out of there. I wonder if Joe Biden has any bias. Do you think, as a politician who is spending tens of millions of dollars in a campaign to try to get the nomination to run against President Trump, do you think he has any bias in rendering his decision that Trump should be impeached? Possibly, which also raises. I know we have some callers on the phone lines here. I'm going to get to you in 1 second, so hang on tight. I wonder, that also raises the other question, and that is, well, the House has Democrats have the majority in the House of Representatives, so it's likely that any articles of impeachment, if they ever get around to actually offering them, because to date they haven't. We've had a couple of weeks now of an impeachment without articles of impeachment, but Democrats have a majority in the House. It's likely that articles of impeachment would pass, and so the case would then go to the Senate for trial, where senators would sit as members of the jury. And I wonder if Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Senator Cory Booker, I wonder if they will sit in that jury, even though they are running for the Democratic nomination for the right to challenge and run against Donald Trump in the general election. I wonder if they will sit on that jury. I'll bet you they will. I'll bet you they will. Do you think that they have a little bit of bias, just a little bit of bias, in that they want to run against that man? And wouldn't it be a lot easier if he weren't there? If he were impeached and removed and gone? Oh, my goodness. Well, let's open the phone lines. We'll take some calls. We have Scott from Lebanon. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Hey, Mark. Good afternoon. Good show.
Yes, thanks, Scott.
I got on here a little bit after 1:30, and I know you were talking about the ambassador to Ukraine. But one thing this week, and maybe not even this week, the last 2 weeks, is there anything – we understand and we know what's out there in the press reports, and Glenn Beck did an excellent job as far as bringing forth the info on Hunter Biden and his associates in as far as with the Ukrainian energy deal and the investment deal with Beijing. But there's a lot of money went to Iran on the tarmac at an airport in Iran, which was just bundles of cash. And I think John Kerry was the Secretary of State back then.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead, Scott.
There's another $1 billion that never went through Congress as far as a treaty or so on and so forth. It was just money handed over to another country, where you do have, as far as the information that's being presented, as far as Vice President Biden, Chris Hines, John Kerry's stepson, and there's a lot of shady stuff that's taking place in the shadows. And this Iranian, the money that was handed over to them, who knows where that money went to?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Do you mean the pallets of cash that went over to Iran?
Absolutely. Traceability on that. Now we see the characters involved in the negotiations back then, and we see what's been, would have transpired here at the end of the Obama administration. It's just, it really operates in the shadows of just really questionable dealings there.
Well, we know our current president is very upset that the Obama administration gave $150 billion to the mullahs in Iran. And it could be perceived as some sort of bribe for the Iranian officials to actually go along with the nuclear deal that the Obama administration struck with them. But that's a good point you raised, Scott. I appreciate you doing that. Thanks for calling in. There's a lot going on. The former Vice President Joe Biden has been the central figure, as Scott pointed out, in the Obama administration with regard to Ukraine, China, and there was some monkey business going on in the Obama administration with regard to the Iranian deal that President Trump has spoken so vociferously against. So we'll have to wait and see if any developments come out of that particular issue. The president himself has been fighting back against Joe Biden. The president really lit into the Biden family during his rally in Minneapolis the other night. I don't know if any of you watched that, but the president was really fired up, and he has coined a new phrase, "Where's Hunter?" So you have to Google that rally and watch the president at work. He kind of goes into a little comedy routine throughout his public rallies, which makes it very entertaining to watch. But he goes into this whole riff about where's Hunter? Where's Hunter? Joe's son Hunter got thrown out of the Navy, and then he became a genius on Wall Street in about 2 days. By the way, whatever happened to Hunter? Where the hell is he? Where's Hunter? And then they go to China, and Hunter is not too smart. He goes in, he has a meeting, and he walks out with $1.5 billion with a B, $1.5 billion. Now think of it. Where's Hunter? Hunter, you know nothing about energy. You know nothing about China. You know nothing about really anything. Hunter, you're a loser, the president said. Why did you get $1.5 billion, Hunter? Anyway, so the whole "Where's Hunter?" refrain, I would be surprised if the president has not already trademarked that slogan, "Where's Hunter?" And maybe some enterprising entrepreneur who's listening to the Mark Scaringi show will try to beat the president to the punch and try to trademark that phrase and sell some T-shirts, the "Where's Hunter" T-shirts. But I'll bet you his campaign is already selling them. If anybody knows, call in and let me know if the president's campaign is already selling merchandise, T-shirts with "Where's Hunter." We'll take another quick call. We have Ken from Carlisle. You're on the Mark Scaringi show.
Hey, Mark, just 2 quick points if I could.
Yes.
And I never call a radio station. This is a first for me, but I just felt compelled to call.
Well, thanks for calling.
I've never, and I listen to a lot of radio, and rarely, if ever, have I heard someone say that, the Democrats want to, pull this coup d'etat, they want this, they want that. And it's like, they ought to be careful what they wish for, because what do they think's going to happen? Say they kick Trump out of office, and say they do this and they do that. Do they think we're just all going to, raise our shoulders up and say, "Oh, okay, oh well, I guess that's just the way it goes"? It's not going to happen. They should be careful what they wish for here.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I think you raise an excellent point that no one in the media is raising, but it's certainly a very good point. If the impeachment process were being conducted in a way that conforms with the United States Constitution, the rights of due process, if the Democrats gave the president and his Republican advocates and defenders the right to call witnesses, the right to cross-examine, the right of compulsory process, the same rights that President Clinton had, that President Nixon had in prior impeachments, if the impeachment process were done properly, well, then Trump supporters would not have a whole lot to argue about.
Mark, you just brought up my second point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why don't all these congressmen that are in these so-called impeachment hearings, but they're really not. They're just play acting. But why don't they just, in all these hearings, whether it's in public, whether it's in private, whatever, as long as it's not an official impeachment inquiry where it's been taken a vote on the floor, and it's this pretend stuff, why don't they just not participate? Let them preach to the choir. Just let it all be all Democrats in there listening to her spill off her mouth or whatever. They should just right now stop. Just stop having anything whatsoever to do with this fiasco.
Well, the White House did issue that letter where they indicated they were not going to participate and they were not going to permit executive branch officials.
Well, we know Trump is fighting. We know he's fighting, but I'm saying these other ones just don't go. Just don't even participate. Go have lunch or something when they're having these hearings. What would they do? What would they do?
Well, I get your point. Don't go to protest the fact that it's a fraud and that it's essentially a star chamber proceeding where they're ramming it down our throats. But that's a kind of a double-edged sword
I agree.
because now you don't know what's going on, and now the only spin comes from the Democrats. So I listen to Representative Jordan on Fox News and whatever other news station will put him on when he comes out of these secret hearings and he says, "Hey, there was no there's nothing to it." At least we're getting some reports coming out of this.
Yeah.
The fact that these hearings are being conducted behind closed doors should be it's shocking to me.
The whole thing, Mark, is bogus. But they're talking these so-called impeachment inquiries, which again, it's not official. It's not. They're talking to the 21, 30-year-old on the street that just catches bits and pieces of news. Their mind's already made up. So that to them, this is really serious. This is official. This is an impeachment.
Hey, Ken from Carlisle, I want to thank you for calling. I'm running out of time here. We have other callers in the phone booth here that. I apologize I can't get to you. I want to thank you all for listening to the show. Tune in to the Mark Scarinci Show every Saturday at 1 o'clock here on WHP 580.